Welcome to the International School Podcast. I'm your co-host John Mickton and Dan. Hello.
Hi, John. How you doing?
Good. And yourself? You're
Yeah,
moving again.
moving again. Yeah, and you were here in my home city last week, and I missed you because I was
I
in Austria.
know.
So
Yeah, you were in
that's you
Austria.
that.
Anyway, and we've just been talking, and I know, Dan, you've been really very proactive about keeping in touch with this whole accelerated change with AI and chatbots and GPT-3, 4, Claude and Bard. There's just so much going on, and I think what I enjoy is that you're always kind of keeping up and trying things. And you were just mentioning you were on GitHub trying. Why don't you tell us a bit about what you were trying? Because that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, literally just before this call, Auto GPT. It's just built on top of the Chat GPT-4, and it basically allows you to create tasks that can function independently and keep without a human. So you create a task, and it just keeps modifying it and keeps going. So again, I've heard people say it's amazing. I'm just about to use it. I'll probably play around a bit more after this call, but it's like we were just saying, the news cycle now is every 24 hours is it's like a year in tech news now with artificial intelligence, and there's a lot of hype, but there's also no one that it's unknown where it's going right now.
Yeah, it's the thing that always makes me a little nervous is this term black box. Well, there's this black box and we don't know what's actually going. And when the Google CEO shares that in a podcast, I'm thinking you really might want to know what's going on in that black box. Anyway,
You
one
can't know.
thing
That's
that
the
I
crazy
think,
thing about it. You can't know what's going on.
yeah, which is amazing. One thing definitely with Chat GPT has been how this has been a value added proposition for a lot of teachers. We've seen things on lesson plans, writing reports, just doing, creating differentiated literature circles. And you just see a lot of teachers making the most of it. And that's been really exciting because a lot of the work that teachers have to do that's not focused on teaching and learning often is administrative and it can be time consuming. And I think what's exciting to see in the landscape is how teachers are sharing that on YouTube and different professional learning networks and really leveraging the tool and saying, hey, I can do this and why don't you try that? So that's been really exciting. Coincidentally, with all this accelerated change, Dan and I came across this organization called Real Fast Reports, and they're based out of the UK. And we're really excited to have them here today as our guests. The year's finished, and report cards are kind of done, and of course, there's a lot of emotion and workflows and time consumption creating reports. And we're going to unpack a bit with Peter and Angela about their organization and also talk about how does a small company leverage this technology to start their own business. So Peter and Angela, welcome to International School Podcast. Maybe I'll let you each introduce yourselves very briefly and then we'll kick off.
Thanks so much for having us. We're really excited to be here. Yes, I'm Angela, and I'm one of the co-founders of RealFastReports, as you said. I'm a former teacher, so for my sins, chemistry was my subject, and I taught for nearly 10 years across schools in London in different contexts. I currently work at the Department for Education in a totally separate field, and alongside that, have recently set up RealFast Reports with Peter.
Peter.
And I'm Peter. I was also a teacher for about 12 years, a physics teacher, both in the UK and overseas. And over the years, I've been involved in a few startups as well. For the last 3 or 4 years, I've been working full time as a web entrepreneur.
Great.
Fantastic. So, one thing that I'm finding really interesting is the idea that you're a small organization, there are two of you, and ChatGPT got released, and there's an API, which is a way that small companies can leverage that technology. What would be interesting for our listeners is maybe unpacking that process. So, you come up with this idea, and you're thinking, wow, ChatGPT 3 really could help us. How did you get the API? What is an API, and what are some of the steps that suddenly you realize, okay, we were hot onto something?
Yeah, so the API is something that people talk about the API all the time at the moment, and a lot of people don't know what it is. So I'll try and explain it a little bit. So for those of you who have tried ChatGPT, ChatGPT is what you call like a user interface, in this case, a web interface, where a human types stuff into it and then the human gets stuff back out of it. API stands for Application Programming Interface, and basically it's a way for computers to talk to computers rather than humans to talk to computers. So with us, when you talk to RealFastReports, for example, so you as a human can talk to RealFastReports and type in some stuff to write a report. We can then talk in the background. Our RealFastReports computer can talk to the OpenAI computer to get it to do cool AI stuff. It can send back cool AI stuff, and we send it back to you. So the computer-to-computer communication is done via APIs. So that's what we're using.
Fantastic. And Angela, how did you suddenly come up? Was ChatGPT your kind of motivation to start this? You're like, wow, we need to leverage this, or were you already on the track to something?
Yeah, actually, no. So we are, I think, well, we will be 1 year old by the time that this podcast goes live. So we had started Real Fast Reports before the big sort of media furore around ChatGPT when it was released. So Peter and I, being former teachers, were catching up, reminiscing about things we really loved about teaching and things we really didn't love about teaching, and writing lots of reports every academic year was one of those things that we didn't love about teaching. And around a similar time, Pete was chatting to some of his tech buddies about progress in the AI space, and heard about large language models, including GPT-3, which was the precursor to ChatGPT. And yeah, the idea was born to use some large language model technology to improve the processes around writing reports and cut down teacher workload.
Oh, interesting. And did you anticipate, so you weren't anticipating that it's by coincidence this came about, or were you working with a different type of AI prior?
No, so we didn't know that, or I certainly didn't know. Pete may have had other insights, but I didn't know that there would be
I knew it was
something.
going to be, yeah, I knew it was going to be absolutely revolutionary right from the off. The first when I started using GPT-3, I knew it was going to change the world, basically. But we didn't foresee this sudden surge in popularity that ChatGPT, really captured the public imagination in a way that GPT-3, its precursor, did not.
Interesting.
Do you think as well that, I mean, it's a slight tangent, but do you think in a way there's some overhype, and especially in the mainstream media, because obviously at the heart of it, it's machine learning, which, I've studied a bit in the old days, and you train a computer on a set of data, and I think it's getting a little bit reported like it's a monster that's going to take over the world. I think a little bit now. Do you think that's the case a little bit? Because at its heart, it's something quite logical.
My perspective is that it's simultaneously underhyped and overhyped, effectively. And until you really start playing around with it and trying to get it to do actual real things, you don't really know what it's good at and what it's not
Sure.
good at, and what it's overhyped for and underhyped for. Yeah. I definitely think it's vastly, even GPT-4 as it stands at the moment, is vastly capable, and it's capable of doing some pretty amazing things. And even the things that it's not good at, in 2 or 3 years, it's going to be amazing at those things. So if you take the example of, you said you were trying out this auto GPT thing, right?
Yep.
So I was essentially foreseeing something like this with my friends over the past few weeks, because we were going through the process that auto GPT is automating. So one thing that ChatGPT can do is write code, for example. So you can tell ChatGPT to write a function to do something that you want it to do, which is cool. It writes code. It often makes mistakes in that code. So it writes you some code to do a thing you want to do, and then you put that code and you run that code, and then you get errors. So you put the error messages back in, and ChatGPT can then use those error messages to try and correct its code. You then put the code back in, you run the code, and then you keep doing that until you don't get any errors, which is one thing. But then on top of that, you want your code not only to be error-free, but you want it to actually do what the function is. So for example, I was getting ChatGPT to make me a function to convert American spelling into British spelling, American English into British English. And I just wanted a simple heuristic that would like fix 90% of the most common problems, kind of thing. So this is what I was getting it to do.
Yeah.
And you not only do you want the code not to have errors, but you want the code to work on test cases. So then I was like, this is clever. I can make ChatGPT make the test cases. So can you give me 50 examples of text in any type of English, and then convert it to British English and American English, blah, 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 blah. You get the idea. So you start getting this idea that ChatGPT can not only test itself, but also it can generate the tests in order to test itself. And at this point, I was getting super, super excited. And this is what AutoGPT does, right? So they're wrapping all of that up into something that's gonna save you from having to take that code and paste it in and run it and paste the errors back. It's cool. But in this whole process of doing that, I realized some of the limitations. Basically, ChatGPT is not that good at writing complicated code. And even writing something that sounds as simple as converting, words ending in IZE into ISE, which is not that hard. ChatGPT got confused writing this function. The function got to being about maybe this long on the screen. And when it fixed one error, it would just create another error. Or it would fix one thing and it would remove part of the function. And so it was clear to me that this process, this auto-reflective process of it being able to test, generate its own tests and improve itself is insanely amazing. But the underlying AI isn't quite there to be able to do really sophisticated, complicated tasks yet. But if you give that 1 year, 2 years, and you think that GPT is not only going to be able to take text input, it's also going to be able to take image input as well, then you could use this kind of self-reflection and self-testing to build all sorts of insane. It's going to be incredible. But right now, I think it's a little bit overhyped because fundamentally it's not sophisticated enough to cope with complex programming tasks, for example. But it's underhyped in that people are only just beginning to realize the power of this auto GPT type function where it reflects upon itself and tests itself and gives itself feedback. It's going to be amazing.
Interesting.
I don't know if that made any sense.
No, that's great. That's really interesting. So you guys decided out of the blue that of all the things that ChatGPT, you decided we're going to write report cards and we're going to help people with report cards. Now, report cards, of course, hit a nerve for many educators, having written report cards. And I have colleagues that write hundreds of report cards that are teaching humanities or A levels, IB, IGCSE, whatever it is. And it's a season that's stressful and it requires hours and hours. What was your experience yourselves as educators that said, okay, we need to solve this. This is not tenable.
Yeah, it was really born out of our personal experience of it being a real pain point. And in fact, one of the schools we spoke to just earlier today described it as the cost benefit analysis just not balancing. So there are benefits to writing reports or report cards, and there are benefits to parents receiving feedback and students receiving feedback periodically in that format. But the burden of that it takes in order to produce those reports, not just for the individual teachers, but often for the wider school system in the proofreading and the checking and the administration around them too. So it was just really born out of that from our perspective of having experienced it, and then as parents reading reports and thinking, you know what, these can be better. So let's try and work out a way to help make things better.
It's interesting you said the school that you were talking to was aware that the value-added proposition was limited considering the front loading that you have to do. Why do you think, Peter, then the people keep writing reports when they know the value-added proposition is not that great?
Yeah, this is a core question. This is a key question. I think it's a cultural thing. Written school reports have been a part of teaching culture and the culture for parents and students for decades and decades. Like literally the other day I was at my mum's place and she had her school reports and I scanned a bunch of her school reports on my phone because it was really interesting to see them. I wanted to read them. And she's got somewhere her mum's school reports and might even have her grandma's. I mean, school reports are a thing. They're a cultural thing that I think do have value for parents and students and that are not going to go away anytime soon. Do they have huge, how do you measure that value and how do you exactly describe that value? I'm not entirely sure because there's lots of other ways of communicating information to parents that might lead to more better measurable outcomes in terms of student performance or student engagement. So yeah, I don't know. For me, we're coming at it from the perspective that reports are almost, I don't want to say it, but like a necessary evil. They're a thing that exists, and many teachers have to write them. And we want to optimize that process as much as possible, both in terms of saving time and improving reports to get better value. But ultimately, are terminal reports at the end of terms and at the end of the year the best way to do feedback? I think that's an open question.
I think it's
Yeah, I
one
think
one
that
piece of the armory, isn't it? It's one piece of the feedback sort of tools that you have. But yeah, it was sort of a reflection that they have existed for a long time. I treasure my school reports. I'm sure I'll treasure my children's school reports. So yeah, they're a feature currently of many school systems.
Dan, have your kids yet gotten reports?
Yeah, they get reports. Yeah, I mean, yeah. I don't.
Uh,
I had very mixed reports as a student myself, to be honest. When I think about it, I don't think I had very happy memories.
Not treasured.
Neither do I. I did not treasure my report cards, that's for sure. So one of the things is you were saying, Angela, is that it's one of the tools, one of the points that people can gauge student learning and progress. So if we know that many schools and pedagogic thinkers are saying that actually report cards don't work, and portfolio assessment, regular feedback, kind of that reflective inquiry process tends to give a better gauge of what's happening. How do you feel that you're kind of working with, something that might be considered as not as effective, but you obviously there are enough schools that still have to do it. They're kind of caught in it. Is that what it is?
I think yeah, it's something which, I mean, uh, would their quality improve to an extent that actually they do become part of that useful feedback mechanism? And if they didn't take so much time, perhaps schools would retain them for longer. I don't know. But yeah, there are certainly other kinds of feedback mechanisms that in the 21st century, schools absolutely should be making more use of. And this is just one of the pieces of the puzzle, I think.
And Peter, when you talk to your clients, which are schools, what are some of the things that, they're scratching their heads, and what kind of resonates for them suddenly to think, oh, there's a quicker, your name is Real Fast Report. So obviously time is of essence. So what are people really coming to you with? What are their pinch points? And you're saying, hold on, this is how we can alleviate that.
Yeah, I mean, one nice thing, because we kind of have two customers almost. We have the teachers themselves. Well, we have a bunch of stakeholders, but we have the teachers themselves, and then we have the leaders. And when we're talking to the leaders, it's really nice to see how many of them not only care about their side of the bargain, but also about the teachers that they're representing as well. So a lot of them are just interested in workload. Essentially, they're aware that their teachers have a very large workload, and that if they can find something that reduces the amount of time spent on reports, then that's something that these leaders are really up for. And in fact, it's also really nice to see a few of the leaders we spoke to envisaging the teachers saving this time and not immediately filling it up with some other task. So they were they were looking to embrace this time saved by teachers as a gift to their teachers, which my concern whenever you invent anything that saves time is something else just going to come in and fill the gap and waste more time. So that's one thing. The other thing from a leader's perspective, from a school leader's perspective, is, well, two things really, both relating to the quality of the reports. One is a mundane consideration, which is just about errors. If errors go home in reports to parents, that looks bad. It feels bad for the parents. It feels bad for the students. This could be spelling and punctuation errors, or more importantly, it could be errors in the name of the student or the gender pronouns of the student, which can easily creep in if teachers copy and paste from one report to another. So this is a major problem that a lot of leaders report, is a huge number of corrections, a huge number of errors, and even as much as you try and proofread them and correct them, some of these errors still slip through and end up going home to parents. So errors in reports is one of the big ones. And then apart from that, it's also about the quality of the reports, how individual each report is. Again, if you write just 3 reports for each class, a good one, a middle one, and a bad one, and you copy and paste one for each student, you're not really giving a very personalized picture for each student. So that's something else that these leaders are looking for.
And Angela, the teacher perspective, what are teachers telling you when you engage with them as with your, approach?
Oh, teachers, yeah, they absolutely love the fact that you can actually focus on the feedback. So you not worry about how all the sentences join together and whether it sounds a bit clunky and a bit disjointed. You can just focus on the task at hand, which is what do I actually want to say to this student and their parents that is actually going to resonate and motivate and inspire them to continue to work hard, do well, improve, etc. So yeah, that's the sort of key from the teachers. It's about giving feedback in really short note form and the AI doing the job of pulling that all together, and those notes being able to be used for other pupils in the class if that's relevant. But equally, it's just the teacher voice is the focus, not the admin around the report writing and the checking. It's the giving of the feedback is what they like.
So you guys must have done a lot of market research, interviewed teachers, parents. What about students? Are they part of your stakeholder group that you engaged with? Just kind of as you decided to do this, because there are report databases. There are different companies where you can have drop down and things like that. What was it that you were bringing that might have been different?
So we actually haven't spoken to that many students. It's something we need to do more of. But yeah, I suppose in comparison to those kind of more static report comment banks, we just offer a lot more freedom for feedback to be really personal and relevant to the student. Pete, I don't know if you've got anything more to add on that.
Yeah, I did manage to. I mean, I've been really keen to speak to some students. While we were at BET, there were several groups of students walking around on the different days, and I managed to speak to a few of them, which was really great. And I would definitely like to. It's amazing, not only with students but also with parents. I've asked many schools that we've spoken to already what parents think about the reports they currently receive, and without fail, all of them have said, "Good question. I don't know." So it's interesting to the extent to which reports exist, and we've been writing them and sending them home for decades and decades, centuries, and no one's even asking the parents what they think about them. I find it intriguing to say the least. Um, what was the other point, Angela? About teachers, yeah, and the comparison to comment banks. So just briefly to explain how RealFastReports works, in case it wasn't clear. Teachers write their reports as bullet points, so they can be very short. Excellent progress this term, works hard, needs to participate more in class, or you can, obviously make more specific comments about particular things that students have done. We then use AI to turn those comments into prose, but also each of the bullet points you write is saved into a comment bank. But that comment bank is a personal comment bank made up of your personal comments that you have written as a teacher. It's not a generic comment bank that is made up of generic comments made by someone else. And the generic comment banks, it's really hard to make a report that fits together nicely from a bunch of components, of sentence components or sentences. Do you know what I mean? That you pick from a list. It's almost impossible to make that flow in a way that reads nicely. Whereas the beauty of the AI approach is that you write your bullet points without any consideration for how that's going to flow as prose, and then the AI fills in the gaps. And it comes up with a beautiful paragraph that sounds just like a human wrote it, but you have the flexibility to include whatever information you want. So you're typing these bullet points, you can include anything. You're not restricted by or constricted by the contents of the comment bank, if that makes sense.
Interesting. And then the prose is something that then the teacher can edit again and put back in, or is there this back and forth? I mean, when I use ChatGPT, I'm always putting stuff in, but I go back and forth, and I find myself having to edit it quite a lot before I find it at a point that I'm comfortable with. I don't know, Dan, do you have that same experience when you're putting, data into ChatGPT? You have to do a lot of editing yourself?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, definitely a lot of but I think it's kind of designed like that, isn't it? To be an iterative process. You keep putting more things in, but yeah, definitely.
So
Yeah,
for
within
teachers,
So that's the
they can do
interesting
that?
thing. Well, with our approach, obviously our main aim is to save teachers as much time as possible. So this whole idea of saying the right thing to ChatGPT to get the right thing back is called prompt engineering. This is the new description for that. And as you say, it can take a few iterations for you to get the thing out from ChatGPT that you want. So we've done hundreds and hundreds of those iterations, and we've tested against hundreds of different report inputs, and we've read hundreds of different report outputs, and we've honed this prompt that we've written so that 9 times out of 10, or maybe even more than 9 times out of 10, the bullet points that you put in, when you generate that into a report, it's done. And you don't have to go back and forth. Or if you have to make some changes, you have to make a few small changes to get it sounding the way you want. But we've done the hard work of the prompt engineering so that it's not a back and forth exercise with us. It's a one-shot thing. You generate the report, and either it's ready to go straight away, or it just needs a couple of little tweaks. So it's really fast.
And the thing to add,
I have to say that, yeah, go on.
I was just going to mention about the temperature setting. So it's a more technical, I suppose, part of it, but you can, if you like, determine the extent to which you'd like the AI to be creative, given the input that you provide it with. So we at the moment have that setting quite low, which means that the AI sticks very closely to the input feedback that you have provided as a teacher. So that means that the output is largely exactly what the teacher is looking for. Obviously, you know, you could crank that up and make it very creative and have it introduce a lot of additional information, but that would likely result in needing to do more back and forth and getting it exactly as you wanted it.
Fascinating. And have you had any parents call you up? It's like, why are they writing AI reports? How do you kind of, you know, as a parent, and Dan is paying for private school, so he wants a return on his money. He just doesn't want AI to be churning out a lot of stuff, right, Dan? You want some teacher to be working on that report card. So how do you mitigate that feedback? Or, you know, parents like, well, then why do I send my kid to school and I pay £36,000 or whatever it might be?
Well, I guess, the teacher is providing the feedback. The teacher it's just emphasizing the effort that the teacher puts in on that feedback rather than on the writing. And, that £36,000 a year or whatever you just quoted could instead go on higher value activities for the teacher, right? Or as Pete said, be invested into teacher well-being, make your staff body more productive and happier, and able to better contribute in other ways.
And that resonates.
I think,
Peter, you said that with school leaders saying that they were willing not to fill up that extra time. And I think those are, well-being is such a popular and important topic, especially in education. I mean, in the UK, you're reading about, burnout and some very tragic stories, and that's replicated in international schools. A lot of international school leaders and teachers, just feel overworked and their plates are always full and they're being pulled in a million directions. So definitely, I agree, Angela. That resonates. The kind of opportunity that maybe this brings. Is that something that you sell? Is that something that you promote as part of your sales pitch, Peter?
What's that in particular?
The well-being, saving time, then you can do other things. Is the time? I mean, your name is Real Fast Reports. Is time one of the main selling points that you highlight?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, that we highlight, yeah. Time, accuracy, and quality. Time and accuracy and quality of reports, really.
And those
I think are the biggest factors.
And those are the things that you both got back as feedback from your customers.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
and I think
absolutely.
it depends on the context, obviously, that of the school as to what their stance is on whether they people have different reporting structures throughout their school. Of course, every school is different. They've got different frequencies. Some do them lots and lots and lots of times a year, all at once. Others stagger them. So the burden of reports does look different for different contexts, and so therefore um, does the school want their staff to be reinvesting in their own well-being and giving them some more slack? Maybe, but it's slightly different for each customer.
Interesting. So you have got this technology. You're starting to interact with a lot of schools. It sounds like you're busy. You're working both in national and international settings. Is there competition out there? Who else has kind of decided, oh, that's a good idea?
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, we came across a competitor the other day. Our first, as far as we can tell, it's the only other AI report writing tool that exists. And I think it's an interesting example because when I first saw it, I was like, oh, this looks nice because they've got a really nice website. It looks really good. So I was a bit scared. And eventually I plucked up the courage to sign up and give it a try. and it was really quite terrible, I would say. And I think it goes to highlight a couple of the things that we've been talking about so far in this call already. One of them is about the prompt engineering and how much prompt engineering you really need to do to get a good report out from the input. We've invested a huge amount of time into not only testing prompts, but actually developing systems for testing prompts in an efficient way so that we can really, test hundreds of different prompts on hundreds of different inputs to test the outputs. And these guys, it's clear they hadn't really done much prompt engineering because the output it was pretty bad. It sounded like it had been written by a child almost, when obviously you want a score report to sound like it's been written by an adult. But the other thing, linking back to something you said before, and this idea about you wanting the teacher to do the work and you don't want AI to be writing the report. These guys have got a different input method. So our input method is text, and their input method is ticking on scales. So on a scale of 1 to 5, how's their behavior? On a scale of 1 to 5, how's their homework? On a scale of 1 to 5, and there's maybe 6 different boxes that you can tick. And when you do it like that, you just can't. Firstly, there's just not enough information really to write a decent report. And secondly, it doesn't get across anything about how the teacher themselves writes or how the teacher themselves communicates. Our reports, by contrast, even if you're writing bullet points, some of your longer bullet points will convey your style of writing and they will convey your personality, even when writing in bullet points. So I think when people think about AI writing school reports, they might think of different ideas in their head. They might think of this idea of you just ticking a few boxes and it generating everything. And if you have that idea in your head, then you're probably right to be suspicious about whether that can work, because these guys have done it and it doesn't do a very good job. Whereas in our case, I would say I would question, if you think that it's potentially questionable for teachers to write reports using AI, what's the difference between what we do and you writing an email in Gmail or you writing a document in Google Docs? Because right now, if you write an email, Google will complete sentences for you. It will fill in gaps for you. And really, our AI is pretty much just filling in gaps between bullet points, linking them with prose. And I wonder to what extent in the future, any text written on any computer will not be AI assisted, if you see what I mean.
That's
that's
the parental really interesting observation. And I think, this idea that the text that we interact with now, there's this cohabitation with AI. So it's kind of a collaborative text. It's predicting what you want, and understands the patterns that you had. And there was even I was just watching this interesting documentary called the IA Dilemma by the Center for Human Technology. And they are saying that 2024 will be the first election in the US that will not be human run, in the sense that most of the data and most of the polls, most of the behavior that they're going to be analyzing will all be AI generated. And with that, of course, comes some some issues, bias, et cetera, et cetera. So I think what you're saying is that we, as as a group of people, have to become more comfortable cohabitating with that and not seeing it as a minus or that's less human. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
I think probably maybe we both have something to say about this. I think on some philosophical level, there are some big questions here about all of this. Well, philosophical and also totalitarian, potentially, and psychological. It's a complicated picture.
It is. It is. Go ahead, Angela and Peter. Tell us.
Well, one thing is that humans are very suggestible. Humans are very suggestible. I'm not a psychologist, right? I'm a physicist, but humans are very suggestible. And I think sometimes when the AI suggests things, so when AI suggests a sentence completion for you, perhaps you might be willing to accept a sentence completion that you may not have actually written yourself if the AI had not written it for you. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I remember one time typing an email and writing like, how's your fam, as if I was going to write how's your family, and it completed how's your fam question mark. with like using FAM as an abbreviation for family, and I was like, I would never use that abbreviation.
The
Thanks
kids
very
talk.
much. But there are other situations where maybe you would accept suggestions that you may not have written yourself. And so the interesting thing about these AIs at the moment is that they are big and they're run by big centralized companies. It's not a very, AI is not currently a very diverse market in terms of the actual
7
fundamental
companies.
providers of this technology. So if you're allowing AI to auto-complete your sentences, to participate in the crafting of the text that you write for work or for family or for whatever, that is potentially open to influence. Do you not think? From
Sure,
malevolent.
but it's no different from the current situation, because when we were young and there was no internet, John and me, you were influenced by the in the UK, like these 5 TV channels, and then now the internet has been run by the fan companies, the biggest influencers, Facebook, Amazon, Network, Netflix, Google, Netflix. I mean, there's a small list of companies that have a big mind share of people now, as well. So maybe this is
No,
just the
absolutely,
next stage in
absolutely.
that.
To me, it feels weird when it feels like it might be changing the very language that I myself write. And by doing that, it can also change the way you yourself think as well. Because if you say things and if you write things, you tend to believe them. And so it
Yeah.
could even get you saying things and believing things that like just by tiny little nudges. I know it's a bit
Once
Black
you
Mirror.
start pulling at that thread, though, we're all
Yeah.
just a function of each other, aren't we? Because we're influenced by our community and social groups
No,
around
but this
us.
is my point. This is my
So-
point. This is my whole point. But we're not. This is not about us being a function of each other. This is about a few very small, well, a very small number of very big companies exerting control in a way that it's not just us being influenced by each other.
It's true.
And also, there's another weird.
There's a psychological term. I don't remember what it's called, but essentially, if like if you control what pretty much what you're saying, if you control how people speak, you actually controls how they think to some extent. If you get people to speak
Yeah.
in a certain way, then you actually do get them to think in a certain way.
I
Yeah.
think what's interesting, and Peter, thank you for sharing those important reflections. I think, I think my reservation is that I'm excited about it. Don't get me wrong. I have it on my phone and I'm using whatever I can, but I don't think we are taking enough time because it's so fast and we're kind of on a treadmill. I'm not sure how much reflection we're doing or deep diving and really going into the nuts and bolts and saying, how does this work and what is the ripple effect long term? I mean, it's taken us what, 10 years, 15 years to realize that social media has had an impact on loneliness and the way we interact, and it's reshifted the way I mean, I know parents that text their kids upstairs to come down for dinner. I mean, and that's nobody bats an eyelid. Or you go into the train and find somebody that's not on the phone. So
Yeah.
I just think it's the accelerated rate that's not giving us time for pause. And I would hope that we would have more time for pause. That's where I'm feeling like, boy, every time I turn around, and Dan, I think you said it really well. Every 24 hours is something new, and you're really keeping in touch. I mean, it's every day you wake up and bingo, there's something else that we didn't know about that's coming out. I don't know. Angela, what are your feelings as an educator and working at the Department of Education?
Yeah, it's definitely difficult to keep up with. I definitely feel the pain there. Um, I suppose the thing is, some of it is unknowable. So even if we have time to pause, can we really anticipate what those like things beyond the horizon will ever be? It's as you say, with social media impacts, we maybe had time to reflect, but we didn't necessarily anticipate the loneliness factor. Or with mobile phones, we thought this is a great device; it can really improve our lives in X, Y, Z. But did we anticipate all of the sort of downsides of having technology at your hand, at your service, 24/7? Probably not. So I think, yeah, the pace is definitely challenging, but equally, there are some unknowable things that even if we have all the time in the world to reflect, we still won't know.
Yeah.
And by the
Dan,
time
your
we know, it'll
thoughts
be
on
too
that?
late.
Dan,
True.
your thoughts, because you're really, I mean, you work in the tech industry, you're very active, and you definitely leverage these tools. How, thinking of your 2 children and your own ethics.
Yeah, honestly, like I'd love to have a strong opinion, but I'm just not sure really. And I think it's everybody wants to say this or this or this. I'm just kind of following it all at the moment, and I don't know what's going to happen. I'm really like I'm very uncertain about it.
So you're kind of sitting on the fence and watching.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yes, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I think, for a lot of us that can't go that fast, that's maybe the best way is kind of watch the river flow and when we can digest it.
Yeah, I
So,
mean,
but
I'm an entrepreneur as well, so I'm looking at what are the opportunities coming up. I think it's you don't want to get shiny object syndrome. You don't want this to be the new crypto of 2023, and everyone's obsessed with it and then moves on to the next thing. But I'm really interested in it, like on a societal level, like what it could lead to.
I think there's a wonderful quote, and I'm going to ask Peter and Angela to think about what you think your responsibilities are. It's that when new technologies come new responsibilities, and that's the Center for Human Technology that highlights that quote in one of their presentations. When you're working with AI every day, you're talking to educators and other people in the business. How much of ethical conversations do you have, and is that something that you want to make sure is part of your organization that's leveraging AI?
Yeah, I mean, this was one of the key considerations really when we started the whole idea of Real Fast Reports. We were aware from the outset of the potential for bias in the output of these AIs, for example, gender bias or racial bias. And so I didn't even want to go forward with the idea until I could assure myself that we could cope with that, basically, which we could, luckily, via some cunning methods. But no, I'd say we've been having those discussions more internally than we have externally, and maybe this is something where the public awareness needs to be greater around these potential downsides. I'm not sure because there haven't been, if I think now about teachers or of schools who have, for example, asked me about potential bias in our system,
It's
I
a
don't
small
think a single
proportion.
school has asked us.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's come up ad hoc in a few conversations. I think, for instance, when we're at BET, I think conversation usually turns more towards data and privacy than on the sort of bias angle.
And why is data
but yeah,
privacy
there's
maybe more important than bias, Angela?
I think it's just something schools are more alive to already. In terms of data sharing and GDPR restrictions, it's something that's already part of the language of senior leaders when they are looking to take on new suppliers. Whereas
Yeah.
the considerations around bias, it's a new concept, isn't it? Well, not bias itself, but in association with AI, it might be something that they're not already necessarily live to. I think the other thing to mention is that when we talk about AI with educators, often ChatGPT and AI are completely synonymous. There's no sense that AI could be broader than that. So I think we're just at the very start of the learning curve, not as a society, but also within the subset of educators of understanding, you know, what this has potential to become. And ChatGPT has been sort of the key to unlocking the door, often for those conversations and beginning to understand the potential. But yeah, I think it's early days.
What's interesting is, Peter, you say that bias was a big issue for you and you weren't willing to move forward till you had some clever workarounds. I'm not going to ask you to divulge company
I can tell you
secrets,
if you want.
but what I'm just wondering, what do you notice with AI where bias comes up? What is it about AI? I know the data sets are very broad and they can pick up, on a lot of different biases. There's a lot of bias on the internet. Is that what it is, or is it more granular?
Yeah, so the bias comes from the training materials, exactly. So in order for these AIs to be able to write text, they need to be trained on vast, vast, vast quantities of text, and that's how it works. So if the text that they're trained on contains racism, racist text, then the AI might well write racist text. If it contains sexist text, then the AI might well write sexist text. And that is indeed the reality. Um, I haven't actually, interestingly, I haven't been testing how biased AI can be at all recently, because obviously I'm trying to do the opposite. I'm trying to make sure the output is as unbiased as possible. So I'm not doing the opposite direction, which is seeing how biased it is. But the precursor to ChatGPT was called GPT-3, and there's some brilliant blog posts that you should read about that, which have these horrific examples of gender bias. So someone would write prompts. So GPT-3 would, in addition to you asking questions, you could also just write text, and it would predict what came next. So you could say, once upon a time there was, and it would predict what came next. So people started doing bias experiments with that, just writing things as simple as like all women, and then it would predict, and then all men, and then it would predict, or women at work often do, and then men at work often do this. And the outputs from GPT-3 were horrifically biased. The difference between the outputs for men and for women was staggering. So this is something that OpenAI have been working on, and they claim to have made progress on it for ChatGPT. I can guarantee they haven't solved it, but I haven't personally been experimenting with that to see how bad it is, because we're, like I say, we're trying to go in the opposite direction to make it better.
Interesting. And so your product, that's one of your things, is to make sure when I write a report that there's not words, adjectives, or adverbs, or what nouns that might lead to a perception of bias in the report. In other words, say a difference between a girl and boys report.
Exactly, because how horrific, how awful would it be if we made a tool that subtly went about entrenching gender bias in students and in parents and in the output. That would be like, for me, that would be an absolute nightmare situation where I've made this tool to try and save teachers time, and it ends up perpetuating gender bias, for example, or racial bias. That for me is not an option whatsoever. Is to be avoided at all costs. But again, there's a lot of philosophical questions here, around this. There's philosophical questions surrounding accuracy and surrounding bias, for example, because AIs can be inaccurate with their responses, and AIs can be biased in their output. And one philosophical question that I don't have the answer to is, what's the threshold acceptable level of bias, and what's the threshold acceptable level of accuracy? Because actually no human is unbiased, and no human is 100% accurate. As a physics teacher, I've made mistakes in physics before in front of kids, guaranteed. And as a human, I definitely have biases. I definitely have biases around gender and race, unavoidable. I don't want them, but I do. So an open question is, what level of this kind of bias is acceptable within AIs, given that humans aren't perfect?
Well, that's like a theory of knowledge question. That's a great one. We'll have to do another podcast.
I don't have the answer.
Yeah. Before we wrap up, Angela, tell us a bit about how are you approaching schools? How do people know about you? Is it just because you're pushing it through social media, or are you actually knocking on doors?
We're not doing any physical door-to-door sales at the moment.
No, I know
It's not a
virtual.
bad idea though. I might add that to the list.
No, we've obviously, our initial users, we had an established sort of network of teachers from our past experience working in the industry who we approached. Some were really keen to just try it straight away and they have been talking about it to other schools, etc. So some through that route. Some has come through social media, through our sort of minimal efforts, I think it's fair to say, in our social media activity. Some individual teachers started using it and then wanted to tell their school about it, and their school have started using it. We've been to a few trade fairs, so we went to BET this year as well. But really, it's just exciting that the teachers who do use it tend to want to talk about it to other teachers, and save other people time. So we've seen some growth in that way.
And I assume you really, teachers can buy individual accounts, but for you is trying to get connections with school leaders and have districts or organizations that have multiple schools. You have the academy schools in the UK, and international schools are different organizations that have multiple schools. How are you approaching those groups? Is it through the teachers, kind of bottom up?
So it's been a bit of a combination. So some has been through some senior leaders directly, so that they would speak to their school and then perhaps mention it within their chains. Others, it has been a direct teacher finding us online and then saying, actually, I am interested in this for my wider school too. So then that being the introductory point. But we haven't done any sort of whole district work yet. We're still working at school and individual teacher level.
Fantastic. Well, we have had the luxury of having and privilege of having you both on this podcast. I want to tell people that in the show notes, Peter and Angela have put links to Real Fast Reports. So definitely, if you have not had a chance, you're going to want to pop over to Real Fast Reports. And I assume there's a free trial for teachers. They can sign up.
Yeah.
And if you have questions, I'm sure Peter and Angela will be really happy to respond. So in the show notes, any final thoughts, Peter and Angela, as from your experience from, a year ago, and here we are at the end of a school year, looking at a new school year. Any just final thoughts or reflections?
Enjoy the summer holidays, relax, and remember that that well-being as a teacher is important for you as a person and for your job, for doing your job well.
I can't agree more. Angela,
I echo that. I echo that completely. Yeah, you work so hard and do such a valuable job. Yeah, take the time that you need to rest and relax over the holiday.
Yeah, the summers are nice. This means Dan has his kids for 8 weeks.
Yeah,
Me too.
it's the worst time.
Anyway, both of you, thank you so much for being so generous with your time and sharing your perspectives. It's just wonderful. And let's keep in touch as you grow. You're just two of you in the company, so you must be super busy. Angela, how do you juggle a full-time job?
That was going to be my question, because I'm curious from an entrepreneur point of view. How do you do it with the job and doing this?
Juggling is tough. Pete probably does more than one person's work, is the true answer.
I have had 1 or 2 late nights.
Yeah. No,
but you're
there's
managing
no
to
easy
do
way.
both, Angela.
Yes.
Angela, you're
thank you.
managing to do both.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that's always hard, I think, for entrepreneurs that are starting. Often they need another income, and so they're juggling 2 workflows.
Sure.
And how do you transition over from one to the other? Peter, I take it you're doing this full time?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So I took that leap nearly 4 years ago now. I left teaching to work purely on startups, online enterprises. Yeah.
And is it bootstrapped, or do you have funding, or how have you structured it?
We're bootstrapped so far.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. That's great. That's the way
Well,
to
we
be.
can
If you
tell
can get
our
away with it, in
audience
my
Some
opinion.
funding in the pipeline. So hopefully by the time this goes live, we might have some extra money and support as well.
Cool.
maybe tell us about bootstrap for the listeners that might not know that term, because it's an important term.
Well, basically doing everything with your own money, or if necessary, I guess probably extends to maybe friends and family funding. So yeah, starting a company with minimal resources and
Yeah, it's the
your own
approach I've
funding.
always taken. Everything I've done is wanting to do it, because I don't want to have a VC backed global mega company. Like that. Everyone's got a different philosophy of what they want from a business. So I've always been very much in the community of people just doing it themselves. Starting small, keeping costs low, and not getting any funding. But like Peter said, there's different levels. You can get like seed funding, you can get angel funding, you can get all the way up to VC funding and private equity funding and stuff. So it's there's different levels. I've just never had any in my kind of entrepreneurial career. I like just to do my own thing and not be beholden to anyone. But I think with what you guys are doing, you might need it. If you want it, because just given the scale of it.
Yeah, and for me, one factor is that I like everything I do, ideally to be a learning and to be a growth experience for me. Because I've already started a few companies, I've built a few different products, and so for me, part of the decision to go down the funding route was just that I've never done it before, and I'm interested to see what that process is like, see what it's like getting in that expertise, external expertise. Maybe it'll be a nightmare, but so far the indications look like the investor we've got is really great. But yeah, for me, it's just about trying new things as well.
Yeah, and the investor we have hopefully will come through is in the education space as well. So it's not money without expertise. It's hopefully going to be useful strategic guidance as well.
Great. That's what you need. Yeah, that counts for a lot, for sure.
Well, thank you, everybody, Peter and Angela. Again, show notes, Real Fast Reports. check them out, and we look forward to keeping in touch and hearing how things are. In the show notes, you have links and their bios, and of course, don't hesitate to reach out if you want to find more or sign up for a free account. There you go.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, it's been a pleasure.
Bye bye.